What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the SEQTEK Podcast. We are so glad that you chose to join us here today. My name is Matt, and with me, as always, Mr. Kenn Williamson. Kenn, how you doing, man?
I'm doing really well, thank you.
Good.
Been busy. It's a busy time of year and number of project launches and continuing onward, but really happy to be here with you. How have you been, Matt?
I'm good, man. Busy as well. You know, we've got a lot of deployments happening in our company. A lot of great work, you know, as we got through the first quarter. So that's been great. And, dude, I'm doing really well. I'm so happy to be here with you. I love the new haircut. We got another one to put up, but you're going away from the dark wizard look. That's the thing. It's almost like you're on this like Vegeta career arc where you're turning good. You know what I mean? Like, are you fighting with Goku now? Like, what's happening here?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like this is the arc where the villain is redeemed and joins the good guys. So,
that's what I feel like. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I got tired of the longer hair and just been kind of doing a more spring summer cut, short, and so, you know, we'll see. My hair grows really fast, and so like if I wanted to, 6 months from now, it would be back down to my chin. You know, we'll just see what happens.
That's awesome, dude. That's great. No, it's good to be here with you, man. And I'm excited for a great Dev Corner today.
Yeah, it's kind of been a little while since we've done one of these, and so I'm really excited as well. I'm excited about the topic today. Do you want to go ahead and say a little bit about where you came up with this topic and some initial thoughts?
Yeah, so really what we wanted to do today is focus on a couple of things, one of which is just maximizing your efficiency systems. And what I mean by that is a lot of tech teams will say, okay, we're going to be agile. And the great thing about agile is agile. You know, there's no one carbon copy cookie cutter way to do agile, and there's nothing wrong with that. But then what you'll do is you'll say, okay, cool. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to manage our agile process in Jira, right? For example, which is Atlassian software built to manage things like, you know, an agile work process, and it works with Confluence and Trello and a whole bunch of other things, but we kind of just stop there. We go, okay, we're going to buy Jira. And what we don't do, and this is something that we're starting to really hone in on in our company, in SEQTEK, is helping companies maximize Jira. Because you can buy Jira, you can have Jira, but if you don't make Jira efficient and work with a true agile process, Jira actually becomes a disorganizational process, because all of a sudden now you have all these different Jira instances across different teams. Everyone's using it differently. There's no conformity. There's no translation for a dev who's going to move project to project. You know, we talk about this all the time. As a dev, it takes 6 months to ramp up on a project technically. If I have to not only within the same company ramp up on the tech stack and the software and what we're building and the requirements and, you know, the scope of work, but I have to retrain myself how to use our efficiency systems like Jira, because this new team uses it completely different than the last team. That just adds complexities to on-ramping a new employee. And so I just kind of wanted to hone in on that topic for a little bit, and then, you know, also maybe talk a little bit about some data as well there at the end. But man, I mean, what do you think about that that whole idea, and just what it actually means to maximize your softwares like Jira? You know, these things are supposed to be helping you. You got to make sure they actually help, right?
Yeah, I think you made a lot of great points there that we can unpack. It is something that's really difficult, because these tools have been developed to work for many different companies in many different ways. Yeah. And I think we're to a point where the complexity of the tool is so great that it becomes very difficult to manage for a company that doesn't understand it. And so, you know, this is new to us as well, but we've been offering a service that a professional, basically a professional Jira guy that will come in and help you set up the system. And we're talking about Jira because that's a lot of what we use, but this same conversation will apply to Azure DevOps,
Monday.com, any of them.
Yeah, any of them. And because all of these tools have been designed to appeal to a broad audience. And what is necessary is to take that tool and make it your own. And exactly what Matt said. There's a balancing act, right? Because different teams maybe want to work in slightly different ways, and that's okay. Sure. But there needs to be a core understanding of how are we using this product? What are we using it for? And what is the goal, right? And if the goal is just to say we're going to use Jira, then I think you're exactly right. It's going to be an anti-pattern. It's going to create inefficiencies as opposed to create efficiencies. And so it's something where it's not necessarily that there's one right way to do it, but it is important that you define how you're going to do it at your company. And so it's not something that can be easily just set up there's a process, right? And like I was kind of alluding to, the complexity has gotten to a point where you really need an expert to help you understand it. And I'm sure that you've been doing a lot of trainings on how to set that up for your project and what's going to be the SEQTEK way of using Jira, but that may not be the exact same way that another company could use it, and that's okay.
Yeah, 100%. It's not necessarily about you need to go and get a consultant or someone to come in and tell you this is exactly how you use this software. But again, what I think a lot of us do is we got to get organized. We're gonna buy Jira and we're gonna stick to Jira. We're gonna backlog and we're gonna sprint refinements and we're gonna do these things and that's great and that's well intentioned. But what happens is if you're giving a whole, if you have 8 project managers or product owners and you're just saying, hey guys, here's this tool called Jira or Monday.com or any of the other, Azure DevOps, whatever it is, go ahead and get this organized. You're going to have 8 different organizational processes and structures as to opposed to if you actually got somebody who had knowledge of that software to come in and set that up for you in a well-balanced manner that can work team to team, that can work with flexibility and nuance from project to project, but have an internal structure that fits what you're trying to do as an actual company, then it becomes a whole lot more valuable than just here's your login information. You guys go ahead and set this up, which is what I think a lot of people do. And then what happens, and the reason why things like Jira consultants exist or, agile consultants exist now is because companies scale, they get really big, and they realize that the bigger they get, the bigger the mess they make in these organizational tools. And someone has to come in eventually and clean it up, And so I think you're more... you're going to have an easier time getting that done on the front end as opposed to the back end,
Yeah, I think that's true of a lot of things. It's much easier to start with a plan in mind than it is to come after the fact because, you have habits are being formed all the time by everybody. And so if you have to go and break bad habits, that's going to cause some pain.
Yeah.
But I think you really had a key point there, which is that you need a process that fits your company. And how you get that is applying the agile model to your tools, right?
Yeah.
Which is introspection, right?
Right.
Looking at how what is important to us, what is important to the developers, right? How do they want to work? What's important to the product owner? How does he want to work? What's important to the stakeholders? What do they want to see? What kind of deliverables out of Jira do they want? You know, and you get all of these things and you put them together and you have a system that will create efficiencies. And it's not something that I think, you know, we've talked about this before, that you can do in a waterfall type manner. You can't sit down with the developers, sit down with the PO and the stakeholders, and before you do anything, say, okay, we're going to figure out every single detail of how we're going to use Jira. But it's more of an agile mindset of saying, we're going to start with the end in mind, with the end being that the developers are happy with their workflow, the product owner's happy, the stakeholders are happy, and they're all getting what they need out of this software. But rather than starting with every detail up front, we're going to start with a few details up front, and then we're going to iterate, and we're going to keep that introspective process, you know, every 2 weeks or every month or however you guys want to do it in your company. But it's something that it's a continuous improvement. It's not something that you can just set up, you know, configure out of the box, say, this is how we're going to do it. I just think that's a little naive and probably a little bit of an anti-pattern.
I remember in high school, my mom, you know, my mom was pretty frugal, you know, growing up. Like, she was always a budgeter, you know, she wasn't going to spend crazy money. But the one time I saw my mom have kind of an impulse buy was she bought this really fancy set of knives, right? She got these really nice kitchen knives. And she thought in her head that, you know, these knives are going to make cooking dinner and meals a lot easier. And then she gets the knives, and what she found out when she wanted to return the knives 2 weeks later was that having good knives was great, but you kind of have to learn how to have good chopping patterns, right? Like, you got to know how to use a knife well. You know, you got to know how to puree. You know, you got to know which knife does what. I mean, you know, I remember, you know, 2 weeks in, she wanted to return the knives. The salesman comes back over, and he finds out that, you know, she's trying to cut her vegetables with a knife that was made for something completely opposite, right? And that just brings me, you know, but my last thought on this is just that, you know, it's great to say we're going to get organized and to have an organizational structure. But you got to give whoever's managing these things, these efficiencies within your company, you can't just put it on their lap and then expect that they're going to have that up tomorrow or the next day. There's a learning, you know, if you're going to be in charge of your company's, you know, Jira instance, you know, we keep saying Jira, but really just your organizational agile, you know, system, there's probably a solid like week where you just need to be doing training. How does it work? How does Jira work? How is it intended to work? What does the documentation say? What do the training videos say, right? We don't like, you know, I think this is one of the things that you see is the rub for a lot of like developers or product owners is like, you know, you get dumped a new technology, whether it's a tech stack, you know, an organizational system, it gets dumped on your lap and they just want you to have it up and ready tomorrow. But, you know, you really got to allow time to actually learn what these things are. And then once you understand the capabilities and everything that you could do, and you spent a good 40 hours just learning about your tool, right? The tool that you have, now you can start seeing how does the tool apply to my company, you know? But I think just a lot of people want to skip that first process, you know? They don't want to give time. It's like, what do you mean? You want to spend a week learning how to use this tool? It's like, yeah, they probably need a week. At least.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great analogy that you used because these tools, you know, they will have a lot of different, you know, knives, so to speak.
Yeah.
You know, there'll be a support ticket, you know, tool. There'll be a Scrum development tool. There'll be a Kanban development tool. You know, there'll be all of these different tools, and you need to understand as a company which tool do you want to use in order to get the best result, and exactly how you said, the technique of using the tools. Like what are we trying to accomplish, and how do we do that separate from the tool? And then how do we do that using the tool, right?
Yeah.
And so I think all of those things are really great points. And so I think it's great that you've been diving into all of this. And really, it's something that I hadn't spent a ton of time thinking about until, you know, we had recently kind of been looking at this at our company and realizing that we're not utilizing the tooling to the greatest capability that's possible. And we are really interested in using that introspection to keep improving our company and our process. And then the nice thing about the business that we're in is we are using those insights that we're developing in doing that introspection, and we're helping our customers with those.
Right.
And so that is just really exciting.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. It's been great to kind of venture into that territory, and you know, I'm looking forward to seeing what else comes, you know, from that, you know, in our own company. But you know, another thing though that we wanted to hit on a little bit, we haven't touched on this in a while, but just we in the podcast have talked a lot about big data.
Yeah.
Right. And we just say data.
Yeah.
As a software engineer, because I think that this matters. I think that if you asked somebody in a C-suite, and then you ask the developer, what is data to you? Mm-hmm. It's a very different answer. From a software engineer's perspective, when somebody says big data, what does that mean to you? What is data? What is big data?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a hard thing to define. You know, what big data on the scale of Amazon or Facebook or one of these big companies, versus, you know, your company, our company, right? But it's hard to exactly put a label on it, except to, I think that, you know, a kind of working definition is data that is not necessarily structured and not necessarily already ready to be used.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we talk about big data, and a lot of times you're talking about data that's coming in from a lot of different streams. You know, you'll have operational data that's coming from your DevOps or whatever. You'll have, you know, company data that is probably from your system of record. You'll have customer data from your CMS, and then you'll have enterprise data from your ERP. And then when we talk about big data, we're probably talking about the nexus of all of these different data streams coming together. And now we have all of this data that's all related to each other because it's all part of our business, right? Mm-hmm. It's all being generated by our business, right? And so there's a relationship between that data, but maybe those relationships are not so explicitly defined.
Yeah.
And that it's not something that we can just, you know, click a button, you flip a switch, and then all of this data is useful.
Right.
You know, so
right.
But it is a little bit of a moving target talking about big data, because what's big data to one person is maybe not to someone else. But ultimately, I don't think, you know, big is a term that kind of denotes size, but I don't think that it's necessarily about the size. I think it's about a lot of different related data that is where the relationships are not so clearly defined.
Yeah. No, that's good. I completely agree. And I think that when I think about data from you know, within a company, I tend to think a lot about I kind of look at like a path. You know, maybe that there's this place that you want to go, that you want to get to, but the path isn't quite clear on how to get there. And what data does is it reveals the roadmap to where you want to go. because data to me is just feedback, right? If you want to know what is our click to conversion rate, well, data will tell you that, right? If you want to know what is, what's the average retention of our client within our SaaS or whatever, how long, once someone subscribes, do they stay? That's data. But then you can get more nuanced than that, right? You can start going layers deeper. You can say, okay, who's coming to our site? What are their ages? What are their backgrounds? What inefficiencies are there within our system that data can show us? Where are we spending, if I have a product and it has to go from a warehouse to a location, where does it spend the most time without being touched, right? Where, there's just a lot of things within data that data gives you, and it's feedback. So, I think that whenever I think about data, you're so right. It's a moving target, because I think at this point, if a client, came and said, hey, what can you do with our data? I think the question, I just turn it right back around and say, well, what do you need out of your data, right? What do you want to see? And we'll come in and we'll software engineers and data analysts, they're really good at helping you connect the dots of like, hey, we have this data here. We can create X, Y, and Z reports, that show this and that. But the real question is, for your company, where are you going? What do you want to do with your data? And what are you trying to measure? What are your actual measurables really as a company, right? Because there's a lot of things you might just not care about. But, we always care about what we measure, right? And so what measures, oh man, I'm going to mess it up. There was there's a good little saying. It's like what gets measured is what grows within a company, and that's true. I mean, whenever you place priority on it, whenever it's measurable, that's when you tend to see results around that data. So that's what I always think about whenever I start thinking about data. I always thought it was just this real like nuanced, clear thing. It's like data in a database. That's your data. But I think more and more now, data is so dependent on the company and the needs, Yeah,
I agree with everything that you said there. And just to take it a little further, there's this additional nuance of compliance. And that is that now people are recognizing that data is valuable and their personal data is valuable. And we're starting to see protections being created around a person's data.
Right.
And there are many, many fields that have very strict compliance, but really every business is starting to get affected by these compliance issues, personally identifiable information, and all of these things. And it feels a little bit like a minefield. And it's one of those things where it's a friend of mine that we were talking about this the other day. It's really a very difficult issue because it doesn't really matter until it matters, and then it is incredibly important.
Yeah.
And so
That's
it
good.
becomes this afterthought oftentimes, and it's something that every company needs to start thinking about. You have this data, you're gathering more data, you're starting to develop insights by, like you had said, asking the right questions of your data. All of these things, you're starting to do this, but you as a company need to start thinking about, well, these questions that I'm asking, is it okay to ask these questions, right? And what questions are okay to ask, and what data is okay to store, and am I storing it in the right way? And all of these things are just really, really hard because there is a varying degree of compliance laws in place depending on your location, and it's not exactly clear if it's where your data lives in a physical location?
Right.
Is it those laws that you have to do? Is it where your data is being used by the company to make a decision? How is data being transmitted around? There's just so many questions. And I'll have to admit, I don't know everything there is to know or even very much about it. I mean, I've only seen the edges of this. I'm more of a software guy as opposed
Right.
to a data guy. But, I've been working on a lot of projects that have been dealing with big data and really dealing more with the software side of how do we get data into a system? How do we optimize of all of these data acquisition technologies? And I haven't really dealt a whole lot with the compliance issue, but I'm working with people that are dealing with that. And, especially in the healthcare space, and it just feels overwhelming, even though I'm just on the edge of it. So it's something that I think companies need to be aware of.
Yeah. No, 100%. Compliance is a big one with data. And there's so many things going into data compliance. You got to keep up with your space in that regard for sure. Yeah, no, I completely agree, man. I think that those are really good thoughts. And I think it's about time we get another data analyst on and talk a little bit about that for sure.
Yeah, it's been a little while. I recall when we had Trevor on and we talked a little bit about what data is. And I thought that was a really great conversation, but I would love to get somebody on to talk a little bit about what seems to me to be this minefield of compliance and managing that, and maybe that's, maybe even more of like a human resources type person to talk about those kinds of things from the business side, even as opposed to from the technology side. So
no, that'll be good. Yeah, we'll get that on soon. But man, I think these have been really good thoughts and another great discussion, man. I can keep going all day,
Yeah, but I think this is probably coming up close to the end.
Yeah.
So
100%, man. So thank you guys so much for watching, for tuning in. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode.
Thank you.